Well, thank you very much for joining us. Margaret Daly Hayes is a Latin American specialist in security issues whose experience has been wide-ranging across the hemisphere, but also wide-ranging in terms of her work with the U.S. government, the multilateral development banks, and the private sector. We'd like to speak to her about the issues of governance failures, and in particular the impact that these failures may have on crime and corruption in Latin America. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, I guess one of my first questions is, since I'm someone who worked in Latin America in the 60s, for decades we have focused on issues of corruption in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so I wonder, are there factors that contribute to not just the existence, but the existence and the persistence of corruption in this region, or in particular countries in the region?
Mm-hmm. I think this goes directly to the question of governance and the way in which governance occurs. One of the things that permits corruption is failure to obey the law, failures to implement and execute the law, or, as Hernando de Soto has written so eloquently in his book, The Other Path, El Otro Sendero, a law that is so complex that it is very costly to adhere to the law, and therefore people avoid attending to the law. So if the law only serves a small segment of the population, Hernando de Soto would argue then a large part of the population, largely the poor, have to make their own law. Or if the state doesn't establish itself or is not effective in parts of a country, let's talk about the favelas, the slums in Rio de Janeiro or in other cities, then the citizens will take it under their own responsibility to construct some kind of law. And that may be the law of organized crime, or it may be the law of some boss or some other. And so I think corruption is facilitated by this very complex legal apparatus that many countries in Latin America have put in place, or by the failure to extend the legal apparatus to all areas of the population.
And of course, by calling his book El Otro Sendero, he is providing a contrast to the movement in Peru, the Sendero Luminoso,
absolutely,
which is saying that social change must be brought about by violent means. And so the idea that he's presenting is that legal and regulatory reform may lead to a structure that is both understood and embraced by people and can be used by them as a path out of poverty.
Correct, and I wouldn't want to in any way endorse the position of Sendero Luminoso, which is a very violent and not very attentive to legal human rights.
Sure. And so he's providing a contrast to that.
He is arguing that you need to put in place something that is very difficult. Because once again, and particularly in Latin America, and perhaps in Mediterranean founded states that rely upon the French law and so forth, there is a perspective about the law that what is written is correct, the positivist tradition, and it is very difficult to interpret the law, to change the law. And so I think we can't discount how difficult it is to change those procedures. But if one doesn't begin to look at how it impacts families, businesses, and so forth at the micro level, then you really can't see how that issue of implementation of the law or the writing of the law really contributes to people going around the law, and that invites corruption.
But when you mention the impact at the family, the household level, I wonder what your reaction to the world study is in the statement in that study that crime and violence are a development issue. Do you feel that corruption, the reaction to
absolutely.
Has impaired development?
Absolutely, because the people who pay the cost of violence, crime, corruption in a disproportionate way are, generally speaking, the poor or those who are far from the main city because the cost of accessing the system is very high. I think this also raises a question of what is government? Government, as Henry Clay brilliantly stated, government is a trust, and the people who govern are the trustees. And the trust and the trusteeship are both created for the benefit of the people. And if that trust is violated by distortion, then those who are least able to access the system or who have the fewest means to protect themselves from corruption or from crime, build high walls around their property, hire security guards, and so forth, are those who are going to most pay. And since as the article by Nikamana argues as well, corruption is an inefficiency in the system, and so the productive capacity of individuals, the opportunity to generate business in an efficient and cost-effective way is impeded. The World Bank study makes a point that the small businesses in Jamaica, for example, pay a disproportionate amount of their income to protect their place of business from crime and violence by putting iron bars on windows and so forth. But that's a cost. So it operates like a tax on the individual and a disproportionate tax on those who have the least ability to pay.
Do you think it also then would have an effect on potential investment in the area?
There's no doubt. Business doesn't like to send, particularly international business, doesn't like to send either capital or people to places that are not secure. And talented people don't like to go there. If a particular city that needs new investment, for example, is like at one point in time Medellin, Colombia was, or perhaps Tijuana or Ciudad Juarez today in Mexico, or the favelas in Rio, is particularly high in violence and crime, business is not going to go there and set up because the cost of undertaking the business, that tax that corruption, violence, and so forth represents is too high. They'll go someplace where it's easy to do business, where they're welcome, where you don't have to pay for the security guards, or for the machinery to check everybody's briefcase and purse and so forth as they come through the building. There's an interesting study done by the Auditor General of the Federal District of Colombia, which is where Bogota would be. And it argued that the cost of security, or the investment in security that the citizens of the federal district are making is equal to 60% of the budget of the federal district of Bogota, Colombia. Now, those are private investments in addition to the budgetary expenditures, but that's a tremendous and not very productive investment. That's creating jobs for security people, but it's not creating jobs for people who produce things. And I think that gives you a sign of what this tax on the economy is when we talk about particularly violence, corruption, crime, and so forth.
And, of course, has longer-term implications because it erodes growth. And one thing that we're beginning to understand is that economic stagnation and low growth themselves are a risk.
One of the challenges in the Latin American region is becoming and then staying competitive with in the global economy. And if there isn't new investment in productive capacity, if there isn't new investment in education and job training for young people coming on to into the labor market, then neither the country is going to be competitive, nor are those young people going to have the skills and training to work, and they are increasingly going to be attracted to alternative employment, which, as we've seen in Central America very often, is involvement with gangs, involvement with drugs, extortion, kidnapping activities, and other. And what's important to observe about those individuals who get engaged in gang activity is most of them would like to get out, but they can't, and they don't have the kind of employment and other opportunities that would draw them out for a sustained period. So the issue becomes, the more you look at it, the more you peel back the leaves of the onion, it's more and more complex. And it goes to the kind of public services I think the state provides, goes especially to primary and secondary education. It goes to how the state works with the private sector in order to create an environment that is conducive to investment. And it goes also to the way the law is applied across the society.
The independence of the judiciary and also the efficiency of the judiciary to be able to deliver its judgments in a timely manner.
In Latin America, very many countries are now moving toward an accusatory system, judicial process, which takes a lot of the labor of building the legal case in a criminal or other situation away from the responsibility on a single judge, and both allows the individual to create his own defense, and opens a situation to juries and so forth. And that has been very well received. Chile, which doesn't have a high level of crime or corruption, was one of the first countries to move in that direction. Colombia, Mexico, across the region, you see this beginning of change in the judicial system, in the judicial process. But by the same token, the laws that govern registration of business. This was one of the discoveries in Hernando de Soto's study, that it takes an enormous 200, 300 days to register a small business. Poor people don't have that time to spend on that. In the U.S., you can do it in a day. That should be the norm. Now, how do you make changes at the procedural level? And the way the bureaucracy is structured in order to make the system be more efficient and more beneficial to the citizen.
And it reminds me that when we speak of security sector reform, we're not only thinking of the training of the military and police, or the organization of the military and police, but of the fundamental laws that support.
Absolutely, and these two are, they depend, and police and law and the judicial system depend one upon another. The reforms, for example, address a change in attitude. Are the police a friend of, a supporter of the community, or are they a challenge, a threat to the community? Do the police have confidence that if they bring in a criminal, that individual is going to be quickly and fairly processed in the judicial system? And are there protections so that organized crime can't penetrate the police, so that the police have the stature, the salaries, the respect that allow them to say no when individuals try to suborn them? And so it's everything is related to everything else in this process. Everything
is related, but there are clearly distinct economic instruments, yet at the same time, in some circumstances, the judicial instruments are the appropriate ones that one needs to use. And
you need to understand the challenges. Economic as incentives or disincentives to investment, crime, etc., and the legal incentives, disincentives. And the way to address each of those are in either process and procedure or change in law. The change in the written law as well as procedural law, and in the education of individuals in the legal profession is a medium and long-term process. But I've been struck that one of the areas that the donor communities don't address as much as I think they ought to is introducing some of this new way of thinking about the incentives and disincentives in the legal structure in the university environment, because we need to begin training lawyers and judges and so forth from the very beginning in the different processes, rather than retraining them when they are prosecutors and so forth, already practicing and already in the system.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else any other observation you'd like to make on the issue of governance failure?
Well, I think I'd like to comment that to the extent that governance is a question of how citizens relate to their institutions, and we've seen this in the Latin American environment, The more the state it does not respond to the issues of crime, corruption, and so forth, the more questions citizens have about the value of democracy, about the value of participating in elections and selecting leaders and so forth. And so this then affects again the way the citizen views that trust, that contract between government and community. So it's an issue that really needs to be addressed with great seriousness.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.